A crowded bus. A young man shames his mother in public until a silent military veteran steps in with a story that changes everything. What happened next left everyone stunned. The bus was packed, every seat taken, and the aisle crowded with standing passengers, clutching poles to stay balanced. It was a typical late afternoon in Birmingham, Alabama. The air was thick with the faint smell of diesel and the hum of ongoing chatter. The usual background noise everyone had gotten used to. In one of the middle rows sat a young man, early 20s, with a sharp jawline and an air of entitlement. His voice cut through the dull noise of the bus. "How could you forget that, Mum? Seriously, it's embarrassing." He gestured wildly. Next to him sat his mother, an elderly woman with silvery hair and tired eyes, nervously adjusting the straps of her purse. She looked down, avoiding the stares directed at them. "I'm sorry, Nathan," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I thought I put it in the bag before we left." Nathan groaned loudly, tossing his head back, as though the world had conspired against him. "You always do this. It's like you can't keep track of anything," he snapped. "No wonder Dad got frustrated with you." Gasps rippled among the passengers. A woman glanced over disapprovingly, while a man in the back muttered something under his breath. But no one spoke up, not yet. At the back of the bus, sitting straight with his hands resting on his knees, was a tall man in a military uniform. His name tag read Gaines, but no one paid much attention to it. His presence was calm yet commanding, with medals on his chest hinting at years of service. As Nathan's voice rose again, berating his mother, Gaines's sharp eyes flicked toward the scene. He didn't move, but his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The mother's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Please, Nathan. Not here. Let's talk about this later." But Nathan snapped again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Talk about it later? You don't get it, do you? You ruin everything. This time." The discomfort was palpable. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, and a teenager pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll but angling it just enough to record the scene. Still no one intervened. Gaines exhaled softly. His eyes remained locked on the mother for a moment before shifting to Nathan. His posture was calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his presence. Nathan's tirade continued, his voice growing sharper with each word. "Can't you do anything right?" he sneered, leaning closer to his mother, who shrank further into her seat. The elderly woman flinched but said nothing, her hands clutching her purse tightly. It wasn't the first time she had endured her son's outbursts, but the public humiliation stung deeply. A man near the front adjusted his tie, glancing back with a look of indignation but still unsure. The woman beside him whispered, "Someone should say something," but no one did, not yet. At the back, Gaines's muscles tensed, his eyes still locked on Nathan, studying him carefully. The tension on the bus was unbearable, like everyone was waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. Finally, from a few rows ahead, an older woman's voice cut through the growing tension. "Young man, don't you think you've said enough?" Nathan froze for a moment, startled by the interruption. He twisted his face into a scowl. "This isn't your business, lady." Before the exchange could escalate further, Gaines stood up. His presence was enough to draw every eye in the bus. He moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. The bus fell eerily silent, and as Gaines approached, Nathan seemed to shrink. Gaines stopped just a few feet away from Nathan, casting a shadow over him. He looked at Nathan, then shifted his gaze to the elderly woman, whose cheeks were streaked with silent tears. He exhaled, his voice deep and steady. "I wasn't going to say anything," Gaines began, his tone calm yet authoritative. "But watching this, I can't stay silent." Nathan tried to flare up. "What? You gonna lecture me now?" But Gaines ignored him, his attention now fully on the mother. He crouched slightly, leveling himself with her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you deserve respect, especially from your own blood. Turning to Nathan, Gaines straightened up, his voice firm, but measured. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Nathan blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Gaines's gaze narrowed, and his voice dropped slightly. "I served 20 years in the military, seen places you wouldn't believe, done things I still carry with me every day." He paused, his voice quieter now. "But nothing haunts me more than the day I buried my mother." The bus fell completely silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. "I was a young man, full of myself." Gaines continued, "I thought I knew better than the woman who raised me. She'd call me, ask how I was doing, and I'd brush her off. 'I'm busy, Mom. I'll call you later.' But later never came." His voice grew softer, filled with pain. "One day, I got the call. She was gone." Nathan shifted uncomfortably, the bravado draining from his face. Gaines stepped closer, his voice quieter still. "Do you know what it feels like to stand over a casket, wishing for just one more chance to say I'm sorry, to tell her you mattered, to say I love you, but you can't? Because it's too late." The passengers were riveted, hanging on every word. The elderly woman wiped her face with trembling hands, her lips pressing together to hold back a sob. Gaines leaned in closer, his tone sharp now. "Don't be the kind of man who waits until it's too late. That's a regret you'll carry forever." Nathan's face flushed, his lips parted, but no words came out. He sat still, his hands clenched, his head lowered. Then, unexpectedly, Nathan spoke. I didn't mean to hurt her." His voice cracked, raw with emotion. The words hung in the air, fragile, as if the whole bus were holding its breath. His mother's eyes widened in surprise, but she said nothing. Her silence was heavy with emotion. Gaines didn't move. His gaze remained steady and unyielding. "Then say it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Say what you're afraid to say." Nathan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, it seemed like he might lash out again. But then his shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. He turned to his mother, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch her arm. She flinched slightly but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry, Mom," Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've been so angry, and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that." Tears spilled down his mother's cheeks as she looked at him, her expression softening. "Oh, Nathan," she said, her voice breaking. "You're my son. I've always forgiven you, but hearing you say this, it means so much." The bus seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting. A few passengers exchanged glances, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Even the teenager who had been recording lowered her phone, her earlier smirk replaced by something softer. Nathan's apology hung in the air, but he wasn't done. He turned back to Gaines, his voice steadier now. "Thank you," he said, his words sincere. I didn't realize how much I was taking her for granted. Hearing your story, it hit me." Gaines nodded, his expression softening. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong," he said, "but what matters is what you do next. Words are just the beginning." Nathan looked down, a shadow of shame still on his face. "I want to do better," he said quietly. "For her." The elderly woman placed a hand over her son's, her fingers trembling but warm. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice filled with both hope and love. Gaines stepped back, his towering frame retreating slightly as the moment shifted. He glanced around the bus, meeting the eyes of a few passengers who nodded silently, their expressions filled with respect. But just as the atmosphere began to lighten, something unexpected happened. As the bus rolled to a stop at a red light, a voice from the back startled everyone. It was the elderly man seated near the emergency exit, someone no one had noticed until now. He leaned forward, his voice gravelly but strong enough to carry. "Young man," he called out to Nathan, "you've taken the first step. Don't stop now." All eyes turned to the older gentleman, his weathered face telling a story of years of hard-earned wisdom. He adjusted his flat cap and continued, his tone firm but not unkind. I lost my son a few years ago. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. Do you know what I'd give for just 5 minutes to tell him how much I loved him? Don't waste the time you've got." Nathan's face turned a deeper shade of red, his eyes welling up with tears he couldn't hold back. He glanced at his mother, her hand still resting gently on his. For the first time in what seemed like forever, there was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding. Nathan looked around the bus, realizing how many strangers had witnessed his shame and his apology. He stood up abruptly, taking his mother's hand. "Come on, Mom," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "Let's get off here. I want to talk, really talk." The passengers parted to let them through, some offering soft smiles, others giving slight nods of encouragement. As they exited the bus, a quiet murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Gaines watched them leave, his expression unreadable. But as the doors closed behind them, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He returned to his seat, leaning back with a sense of quiet accomplishment. A few rows ahead, the teenager who had been recording stopped the video, hesitated for a moment, and then deleted it. "Not everything needs to go online," she muttered to her friend, who nodded in agreement. The bus continued its journey, and though the hum of conversation slowly returned, the atmosphere had changed. People weren't just mindlessly scrolling through their phones or staring out the window anymore. They were reflecting on family, on forgiveness, on the fragile, fleeting nature of time. As the bus neared Gaines's stop, the man seated next to him finally spoke. "That was something back there," he said, his voice low. "The way you handled that, it made me think. I haven't called my mom in weeks. I think I'll do that tonight." Gaines smiled faintly, standing as the bus came to a halt. "You should," he said. "One call can make all the difference." As he stepped off the bus and into the afternoon sunlight, the passengers watched him go. His quiet strength had left an impression, one they wouldn't soon forget. The story reminds us that time with our loved ones is precious. The words we speak, whether kind or cruel, carry weight and can shape the bonds we share. Respect, humility, and gratitude are lessons worth learning before it's too late. If this story moved you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you love. Say the words you've been meaning to say. And if you want more stories that inspire and make you think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's spread kindness together.